for another update, another vlog, I guess. Filming this one while I'm driving, so I apologize for all the noise. But I said I would make these whenever I got the chance, and I'm trying to make these whenever I get the chance. And here I got a chance. I made a vlog, I think, the first night that I was in the camper. I started living in the camper, and ever since then it's been pretty busy. It's always busy doing this, that, or the other. One of the big things about the farm or the country life or stuff like this is that you never really run out of stuff to do. It's just an endless to-do list, and half of it is you really have to prioritize things, one piece at a time, and everything gets prioritized on an ongoing basis, and everything is in a constant state of rot, basically. And what I mean by that is this. Whenever I first got into the camper, I was just like, okay, I have a couple things that I need to do, obviously. Let's get water. I need water. So I got a bunch of milk jugs that I've been saving up and washing out. And I found Beaver Dam, which is pretty close to my grandparents' farm. And I stopped off at the water hose and I got water. And I looked up a bunch of videos about RV life and stuff like that. How are people getting water? And they said that, you should use the white RV hose that costs a little bit more than a garden hose, because the garden hose, if you leave it out in the sun, it'll leach chemicals into the water or whatever. That's what they said. I figured I'd go ahead and believe them. And so that was that. So I went out and I got water from the water hose at Beaver Dam. There was nobody there to, say anything to me at all, one way or the other. And half of it was in a white water hose and half of it was in a green water hose. There's a white water hose coming out of the pump, the water pump, and there was an extension that was green on it. So I just decided, okay, let's filter it, let's boil it, So thankfully I had a Brita filter left over, or at least a knockoff Brita filter left over. A lot of people that live off Brid, they like to get Berkey brand. Berkey is a really good brand. They have like zero customer complaints whatsoever. It's just expensive to get started. I think their bottom line package for on-the-go Berkey filtration is like $100 or a little bit more than $100 for like their travel thing. And a lot of people get like the $200 piece that is a lot larger and allows you to filter, huge amounts of water as you go, and just, take the filtered water out of the bottom. So I went ahead and did that. So I boiled it and I filtered it. I don't have a Berkey, I just had that knockoff Brita filter. And, it took forever just to do all of that. I had bought a little electric plate, and like I said, I'm plugged into my grandparents' power supply. They're supplying the power, they're supplying the land, they supplied the camper, they supplied everything. They're absolutely taking very good care of me while still keeping me at a distance for a wide variety of reasons. Of course, all of this really started before the COVID-19 panic really took off, but it quickly became a good thing because of that, because they're the demographic that often doesn't survive infection with COVID-19. And so that became a thing as well. As soon as the COVID-19 panic took off, I could no longer get water from Beaver Dam, and and so I had to search around. And what the RV Life people on YouTube, they said that you can get water from state parks and city parks. They usually have a water faucet somewhere at city parks as well. And my campus had already shut down. I'm still in classes, so my campus had already shut down. And I ended up going from one park to the next, trying to do all of that, going all the way to Pere Marquette, which is a good 30 or more minute drive away from Beaver Dam, which is pretty close to my grandparents' farm. So like I said, it's a pretty good to drive away. And finally I got to Pere Marquette, and they had all of their signs stating that the park area was closed to the public, but they had pushed the signs back to where you could drive up to the water pump. So I guess they're a little bit more aware of people in my situation, because Beaver Dam had it right in the entrance. You couldn't even drive into Beaver Dam. So even the basic essentials out here, getting water, that's one of those things. So whenever I say everything is in a constant state of rot, what do I mean by that? One of the things that I wanted to put up rather quickly because of the approaching season was I wanted to put up an outdoor stove for a lot of different reasons. I don't like to use my grandparents' electricity that much. I like to keep their bills down as much as I can. I like to be I like to try to be less of a burden on people as much as I can possibly be. Like to try to make myself useful, as much as I possibly can in the situation that I'm in. So I wanted to set up an outdoor kitchen. This is something that off-grid people do quite often. They go ahead and set up an outdoor kitchen. So they have an outdoor kitchen and an indoor kitchen. The indoor kitchen is to be used in winter, of course, and an outdoor kitchen is to be used in summer. A lot of our modern-day Western technology, a lot of that goes to use in heating or cooling our homes. And it's a really inefficient process. If you go on EnergyStar.gov, if you go on that website, if you Google that, and it'll take you to the website. If you go to EnergyStar.gov, they'll tell you that approximately 60% of your household bills is heating or cooling something. Whether that is heating or cooling your house with an air conditioner or a heater, or heating or cooling your food with your refrigerator and stuff like that, or heating and cooling your water. That's also quite an expense. And there's ways around each and every one of those expenses. So to keep your food cool most days of the year, people in developing countries like to use a type of evaporating cooler, which is it's a large flower pot, a bunch of sand, and then a smaller flower pot within it. And as long as they're both traditional clay terracotta type of flower pots, and you plug the holes at the bottom of each flower pot, then you can wet down the sand, and the evaporative cooling effects will lower the temperature of anything that you put in the inner flower pot by about 30 degrees compared to the surrounding temperature. You have to put a wet towel over the top. That's the other thing. So water, wet towel, and wet sand, that will make the evaporative cooling. And you might think, oh, that's crazy. How would that happen? That's the way that us human beings cool down. It's called evaporative cooling with sweat. If you take a chemistry class, they can sort of, give you evaporative cooling processes and everything like that. Whenever you start to learn all the thermal stuff that gets put together, it'll be they'll start saying something like, okay, you burn a firewood. The firewood has, several hundred calories in it. believe it or not, firewood is calorie dense, and that's why it burns for so long. You're burning off the calories that are within the firewood on a chemical, whenever you're speaking on a chemical basis. And then they'll say how much heat does that produce or whatever, and you put, I think you usually put a minus sign in front of the number that comes out of that calculation to note that this is an exothermic heat releasing process. So they also have evaporative cooling processes as well that will lead to whatever the opposite of it is. I think it's a positive number if it's something that's cooling down, but I could be wrong. So that's how us human beings cool down, is that evaporative cooling. Dogs cool down more with like a fan approach, but they use a little bit of evaporative cooling as well because the tongue is wet whenever they're gasping for air, whenever they're panting. So these sorts of things. Anyways, that whole process, that's something that you can do to get around having to deal with all the power related to a refrigerator, for example. But it's not going to be enough for a lot of people. You could start trying to you can start trying to preserve your food by sealing it, and a lot of times that comes with a semi-expensive vacuum sealer, but there's also an off-grid version that's hand pumped, and it works almost as well. And almost as well is pretty good for something that is going to cost so significantly less, not just in the moment of you buying it, but also in the long term of it not using any electricity whatsoever. It's just using your manual power, whatever calories you put into your system. Like, you become the machine that's working on the product that you're trying to make. But anyways, the outdoor kitchen, I wanted to set that up right away because of the approaching season. So I fiddled around with the camper. It had an awning, and it was like a two-man job to get the awning out, and I didn't have anybody to help me. So I went out there and I pushed and pulled and struggled with it for hours. And it was one of the hardest physical tasks that I've ever done. And I eventually got it out and I set it down. But like I said, it's in a constant state of rot. The awning had already been, ravaged by time and, rust and stuff like that. So it went down at a steep angle. It didn't hold itself up correctly. And also, I don't have any instruction manual for anything inside the camper, so I don't know how anything inside the camper works. I have to reverse engineer anything to find an answer to that kind of question. Where does the septic system go? That sort of stuff. For now, like I said, I use a composting toilet, a simple two bucket system. And you can Google that and get into that. I'm not going to get into that, but that's what I've been using. So, the septic that's, or whatever type of waste disposal system that's hooked up to the RV is something that I can't use because I don't know, how it works. I don't know where the waste is going to go. I don't know where the hookups are. I don't know anything about it, and there's no instruction manual that was included with the purchase. Everything has to be looked up online, and I also don't have the title. It's also not my RV, so I have to do very, very minimal stuff with it to try to retain some sort of value in it, because it's not mine. None of this is mine. This car is the only thing that's mine. It's the only asset that I own. So there's so many different, like I said, pieces to the puzzle, and you got to figure them out one thing at a time. You got to go one thing at a time. So I got that awning out, and then I had to prop it up so that it would be raised to a certain height, and then the Illinois weather hit it. So the pieces of wood that I found to prop it up, they're constantly being knocked over. It's constantly slamming against the side of the camper and stuff like that. And it's constantly undoing itself in one way, shape, form, or another. I figured that it would be relatively easy to just, put out the awning and then put tarps on each side of the awning to make a sort of outdoor kitchen that's going to shield me from the elements while I'm cooking out there. So it's not going to stop all bugs, but some bugs. It's not going to stop all rain, but some rain. It's not going to stop all wind, but some wind. And I could, cook out there with a rocket stove. That was the plan. But I put the awning up and I tied some tarps to it, and the tarps got twisted to hell and back in the wind. And they're all over the place. The awning is constantly in a state of, being messed up in some way, shape, or form. Everything in the country, like I said, is in a constant state of rot. Everything. And that's sort of something that you deal with if you're in an off-grid situation, or if you're on your own or something like that. I think as an adult, you eventually get used to the fact that your groceries aren't going to last forever, and you start deciding not to buy things that are not going to last very long. But at the same time, you're going to try to be as healthy as you can to stay out of the hospital, especially during a time like this. And so, you go and you try to buy vegetables anyways, and living in a camper, you can't buy frozen vegetables. You got to buy canned vegetables, or you got to take vegetables and can them yourself, and that's a whole nother process. And people make it sound a lot more difficult than it really is, but that's also a part of the whole thing. There's people out there that make things that'll make videos about something, and they'll make it seem super simple whenever it's actually very complicated. And there's people out there that'll make things seem super complicated when it's actually very simple. Building a house is a relatively, take that with a grain of salt, but building a house is a relatively simple process. You put up a couple frames, you put down a couple pieces of plywood or something like that, and pretty soon you've got a box for you to live in. Whenever it comes to insulation and stuff like that, things get a lot more complicated. Things start to get a lot more costly. That's whenever these costs really start to come in, and that's where the complicated nature of things really start coming in, is whenever you start getting down into the nitty-gritty details of it. You might think, okay, electricity, I'll just go buy a solar panel. So you buy a solar panel at Harbor Freight or something for $100, and you're like, okay, that's some electricity. It's not all electricity, but it's some electricity. Then you realize that you've got to put it into something. You've got to put it into a battery, because electricity is used as soon as it's generated. Now you got to get a battery, but you also need a way to hook up to the battery. If it's a car battery, you can't just plug your phone into a car battery to charge it. So you got to hook it up to a power wall. All of these sorts of things, people make, you switch to solar. It's, super simple and easy. It's not that hard to put it on your roof or whatever. It's not even that hard to put together a solar panel. And then you realize, okay, all the wiring, that's going to be the tough part. And some other people are going to comment, you plug the black wire into the ground, and you plug the red wire into the live, and everything's fine, and it's not that complicated. It's this whole thing. You got to figure each thing out on a step-by-step basis, and you have to take things one step at a time. But it's still far more than most people are going to deal with. And a lot of people say, well, just give up. It's not worth it, It's not worth it to have to deal with all this nonsense. I'm just going to get a job, I'm going to get an apartment, and then work until I die, That's the end of the sentence that they never get to. And I know that's depressing, but really in life, it's when do you want the difficulty? It's not, do I want the difficulty? It's when do you want the difficulty? Do you want the difficulty whenever your parents or guardians pass away? Do you want whenever they're no longer there to provide a lot of things for you? Do you want the difficulty whenever you're old and gray and you don't have all your faculties anymore and it's a lot harder to do everything? Do you want your difficulty then because you didn't prepare for a retirement? Something like that. I was talking to a friend of mine, and whenever I was in ROTC and I was trying to convince him to, become an officer to make that upgrade because he was an E6. And he kept saying, like, no, I'll just retire like any regular person. And I told him, that retirement is half of your income, which at the moment, that means it's going to be about $1,500 a month, and that's not that much to live on. And he said, well, I'll just get a job after retirement. Well, that's not retirement. That's just you getting another job after you leave the Navy. And it just keeps going like that. That sort of stuff just keeps going like that. You have to choose, when do you want the difficulty? That's sort of the choice that you're making. And I know that's kind of painful to think of that way, but always remember that there's people out there to help you. There's YouTube videos, there's a bunch of other things that you can look up. There's a bunch of other stuff that you can do. There's always somebody out there to help you. You're usually not the first person who's ever had this problem, unless you're pretty much inventing something new from scratch. There's nothing new under the sun. That's a saying that people say. That's pretty true. So just remember that you're not alone in these endeavors, even if you might not have any friends or even any surviving family. You're still sort of not alone in these endeavors. But I'm going to cut this short. I'm looking for a labyrinth in Godfrey. There's a sign that points in a general direction, and I still can't find where it is. So I'm going to park. I'm going to start looking around for it because I got to do an assignment for one of my classes. So I'll continue the update in a part 2.